What's up, everybody, and welcome to Bios3 Raw TV. Today we're going to have a little story time. We haven't had a story time in a while. And this story time is actually stemmed from this week. I had to go back to the vet with Bruno. As you guys know, he's a bulldog, and bulldogs have a lot of issues with skin, eyes, allergies, ears. They get infections all the time in their ears and their eyes. He has cherry eye in one of his eyes, which makes the cartilage broken. The eyelid actually pops out, which can be fixed with surgery, or sometimes it doesn't work. So putting him under anesthesia at this age is not really an option unless it's super necessary, like to his life, because he cannot come out of the anesthesia. So he's 10.5 years old now. So let's go back to the beginning. So all of you are aware of my drug using past, my drug addictions, the issues that I had in the past. I talk about them very openly. There's videos on here. I speak almost daily with people that are in the same situation, that have seen my videos and contacted me. And people always like to say there's a silver lining to every cloud. There's something good, something positive that always comes out of something negative. So I would see a drug addiction as something negative. Now, there are positive things that come out of it. Now, here are two positive things we're going to talk about during story time right now that came out of my drug addiction. So obviously, when you're addicted to drugs, you're using syringes, if you're using steroids, you're measuring out milligrams, milliliters. You're doing, different dosages and stuff. You're finding out what dosages you take for certain things. Like insulin is a very dosage dependent thing that you have to nail on point. You can't be like, okay, it's close enough. You can't do that shit with insulin, or I can't anyways, because I'm so sensitive to it. But learning about milligrams per milliliter, things like that, which the average person really doesn't know. Okay, so like if you're in a spot like we were in, let's go back a few years ago, Christmas time, we were at Kari's parents' house. And her nephew Jeffrey, who's the littlest, well, he's the oldest one of her nephews, was sick, and he needed to have, was it James? It was either Jeffrey or James, I can't remember, I think it was Jeffrey. And he needed to have medication to bring his fever down. So they went to the store, and it was supposed to be children's Tylenol, they got liquid Tylenol. So they came back with a liquid Tylenol, and Kari's sister-in-law Amy said, this is not the right one, like this is too strong for him. So I grabbed the bottle and looked at it, and it said milligrams per milliliter. So I went over to the computer, pulled it up real quick, looked at it, and it said the only difference in the liquid Tylenol and the children's Tylenol are there's more milligrams per milliliter, or per cc, of the liquid. Now they actually have a syringe, like an oral syringe, to measure this stuff out to give it to the kid. And I did the math in my head. I went over to the other one, saw how many milligrams. I went to children's Tylenol, saw how many milligrams were in per milliliter. Went to the liquid Tylenol, saw how many milligrams per milliliter. Thought about it in my head, subtracted what I needed to, then kind of took that into how many milliliters or how many cc's he would need. Stuck the syringe and filled it up and said, here's the right dosage for him as the children's Tylenol. Now, someone with really no medical training, because I'm not a doctor, and Kari's mom is a nurse, which she could have figured it out very easily, but before she even had a chance to, I was already on top of it, because cc's and milliliters are what I dealt with all the time, doing steroids, doing other drugs and stuff like that. And I think it kind of shocked her whole family, her mom too, because I didn't have, that kind of background and training. But I was able to figure out very quickly that this is going to be the same based on how much you give the kid, based on how much he needs, based on the two different products. We just need to figure out the milligrams per milliliters for the dosage. And it was a pretty easy fix, and we gave it to him, and he was fine. So that's just one time that, my drug using past actually came in handy to help a kid, which is interesting. My buddy Eric had something very similar. This is going off of my story time, but he, had a drug past, and his grandmother was really ill, and she had cancer, and he was able to, when he brought her home, he was able to give her medicines by measuring them the right way and stuff, because he knew how to work that milligrams per milliliters thing, which is not really hard to do. But when you've doing it so often and so accurate for so long with these other things that we were doing, it just becomes second nature. It's almost like a doctor or a nurse, or sometimes we can figure it out faster because that's something that we just focused on. It's not like a general thing. And the second time happened this week, where my drug addicted past came in to actually help. Now, Bruno goes to the vet. Now, last time he went to the vet, she prescribed him 8 weeks worth of antibiotics. Now, he gets these same things, the ear infection, the eye infection. He gets these same things all the time. Like every couple of months, every few months, his allergies kick in. he gets these same things. And it's at the point now where there's not just a pattern, but you can almost see it coming. So now we go back in, and she tells me, well, he's been on this, and this antibiotic. I mean, there's really none left except for this one, which is like $200 a fucking week to give him. And he'll have to come in and get a shot like every week of this antibiotic. So I said, and now she wanted to run tests for thyroid, she wanted to run tests for allergies, she wanted to run every single test in the book and charge me an arm and a leg, then send me to specialists on top of it, okay, after they charge me an arm and a leg, send me to specialists and fuck up my time and charge me tons of money on the other side. And I said, hang on a second, when you give him the antibiotics, for 2 weeks his eyes and ears clean up. They completely clear up. Then all of a sudden you can see it started going downhill and it starts to come back. I said, so it's not thyroid, because antibiotics don't work on thyroid. So it's got to be some kind of due to his allergies, he gets ear and eye infections. That's what we think. Now, instead of putting him on, like last time you put him on 8 weeks, why can't we do 2 weeks of an antibiotic, 2 weeks off? 2 weeks of an antibiotic, 2 weeks off, indefinitely. And she says, oh, well, what would be the point? I said, I don't know for a fact how dogs, if they're similar to humans, but it sounds to me like his receptors downgrade very quickly within that 2 weeks, and then the product doesn't work. However, when you put him on it again a couple months later, it works again for that 2 weeks. It's a 2-week time period every time before it stops working. So you guys say, well, you really can't put him on antibiotics all the time, but you guys are putting him on every fucking 2 months anyways, which means more out of the year he's on them than he's off them to begin with. But cycling them 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off would allow his body to utilize it for 2 weeks. By the time that other 2 weeks is up, it's not getting that bad again. You go back on for 2 weeks. It's a cycle. And she just looked at me like I had fucking two heads. Like, that's impossible. Like, nothing would ever work like that. And it's based on fucking clenbuterol. It's based on a clenbuterol cycle. Now, I don't know whether or not dogs have the receptors like humans do and it works the same way, but what I'm seeing is the evidence of how his body works. It works for 2 weeks, then it stops working after that, and you see it get worse and worse and worse over the next couple of weeks. So it makes sense to me that give it to him for the 2 weeks, pull him off of it. By the time his body's starting to break down again, you put him back on it. His body's receptors will have enough time to rest in between. If they downgrade in 2 weeks, they're going to upgrade in 2 weeks because you're not blasting them full of antibiotics to the point where you're destroying the receptors. And she just looked at me like I was fucking nuts and was like, well, why don't we try this or try that? I was like, look, lady, why don't we try what I'm talking about, okay? Sometimes the receptors for different drugs, even alcohol, your receptors start to downgrade. You need more alcohol to get the same effect. You get more side effects than not after a while. But the bottom line is, whether or not it's scientifically sound the way I'm talking about it, the evidence on his body over and over again for the last 5 years is showing me this is what's happening. So take the science out of it and say you have to go bro right now, which may sound kind of fucked up, but now we're 2 days, 3 days into his medication now. His eyes are completely cleared up. His ears are completely cleared up, and he's acting normal. So now what I'm doing is tracking on the calendar. When I start to see his ears or his eyes start to get infected again, like the antibiotics are wearing off, that's when we're going to stop him for 2 weeks. And we'll go back to cleansing him with the eye drops, which we're still using anyways, but cleansing with the eye drops, the ear drops, doing that stuff like that to tide it over. Then go back to the antibiotics for 2 weeks and do a blast like that. That is a typical receptor downgrade cycle that I would never have known about in a million years unless I had been doing steroids and stuff like clenbuterol and stuff like that and had to rotate compounds and take compounds out so the receptors cured themselves. And even when you're doing heroin, the more heroin you do, the less it works. Your receptors downgrade again. Your body doesn't produce as much serotonin and dopamine. So now what happens is you have to cut back on the heroin, or some people call it spin drying, where you get completely off and go through rehab. And then when you get out, your receptors are fresh and you fucking whack it all again. Like, the concepts are sound, but I never would have known any of this stuff, and a lot of people wouldn't have known any of this stuff unless you had that drug-addicted past. So you see, like, having something fuck myself up for a long period of time and having to go through the pain myself and learning how to do this stuff, it actually benefited Kari's little nephew and Bruno at the same time. So it's like I'm starting to see areas in my life that although drug addiction fucking was awful, or is awful, although it is the most fucking hard thing that you have to go through, and I fear being addicted to drugs. I fear that if I take a Vicodin and if I break my arm, that I'm going to go through the whole thing again. Like, that's how bad it is. Like, there's very few things in this life I fear. Fire, sharks, and fucking withdrawals. That's what I fear, okay? Because those things you cannot fucking fight back against. When they happen, they happen. You get a fire, you're going to burn. You get fucking bit by a shark, you get bit by a shark. And when that withdrawal hits, the only thing to get rid of that withdrawal is to fucking go back on that drug again, and then you're stuck. So you see, there are things that we may do in our lives that at the time may seem like, you know, not only did I fuck up, but this is awful and this is bad. But then later on in life, sometimes things come full circle and you're able to help somebody with that knowledge. And I'm not going to say it makes it worth all the shit that you go through to be able to learn how to do that. But it puts a smile on your face knowing, hey, you know what? All the pain I went through, I can help somebody with the knowledge that I have from that. Biohazardtraining@gmail.com. Leave comments down below, but don't fight. www.biohazardtraining.com is a blog, and where it's the drug addicts, helped out bicep, and we're out.